There's both Jewish and some non-Jewish people listed.
I think that got it, but I'm not sure.
Okay. And as our author puts it, there is an honest mention of important women in this lineage. So the record shows that God is concerned, faithful, and inclusive to all people. And like my own family tree, Jesus' family is complicated and complex. I guess it's a good way to say it. There's a whole range of people. Some struggled to survive, some were very well off, some were immigrants, some had been in place for generations, some were priests, some were farmers, some were good kings, and some were wicked kings. Some were oppressed, and some were the oppressors. Okay, well, I'm not going to read our scripture for today, but I'm going to show you something.
Oh, come on, Steve, do that.
I think Jim better give me some extra points for this. Because this is like a 6th grade project,
Oh, good.
and I didn't realize how long it would take.
Oh, look at that.
Put it to the camera so they can see it.
Okay, all right. Well, let's follow Jesus's families and generations. Okay, so everything goes back to Abraham. So just like we studied before, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and then we have Perez. And there's an interesting story there, isn't it? About that his father ended up being, well, is Judah, but she was married to some of his sons at one time. There's a very interesting story there to follow. All right, Hezron, Aram, Aminadab,
Whoa.
Noshan, Salmon, Boaz. And now this was kind of interesting in there. The mother is Rahab. And where did we find her in our stories? Mm-hmm. So she helped some of the spies there. And I think she realized the Israelites were going to win the battle. And so she asked for protection for her and her family. And then she becomes part of this family. Okay. All right. Go to Obed, and that was in one of our lessons, the other week? Okay. So his mother is Ruth. Okay. All right. Then we go to Jesse, and then we end up with King David. Okay. So these two are very important in the lineage story, aren't they? Okay. So Jesus is a son of Abraham, and they could say a son of David. All right. Well, David has a son named Solomon. And then there's excuse me, there's another interesting story there, isn't
With
there?
Bathsheba, yeah.
Okay, and she, in our scriptures, was described as the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Okay.
And that was the one that King David sent to Bala so he would die, so he could have Bathsheba.
That's exactly right. All right, Rehoboam, is that right, Jim?
Rehoboam.
Okay. If I mispronounce, will you straighten me out?
I can only tell you what they taught me. I'm not sure it's correct. I just know that's what they told me to say.
Ahijah, does he believe that?
Abijah.
Okay. Jehoshaphat, Joram, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Okay.
That's a nice chart.
It took longer to do than I thought it would.
They usually do. Oh, look at this, and that goes still on. Look at this.
So we're continuing. Okay. So Manasseh, Amos, Josiah. So at this point, we're 28 generations. And so this would be right before the deportation to Babylon, okay? So this one is deported. Jeconiah, Jim, help me out with this one.
Salathiel,
Okay. Zerubbabel,
Zerubbabel,
all right, Abadad, Elikim, Azor, Zadok, Akim, Elud, Eleazar, Mathan, Jacob. Now this is another Jacob.
yeah.
It's not the one way back at the beginning. Okay. And so then he is the father of Joseph. So he's the earthly father of Jesus, I guess is one way to describe it, isn't it? All right, and then we go to Jesus the Messiah. So he's the 42nd generation there. And I don't know if there's any, you think there's anything special about the number 14? Okay, well anyway, our Bible said it was 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the deportation when they got shipped to Babylon, 14 generations from the deportation to the Messiah, till Jesus appears. But anyway, that's a lot of time, isn't it?
That's a long. It's about how many kings there have been in England. I think Charles III is like the 43rd king.
Uh-huh. And what president are we on, isn't it? The
46th.
46th.
Something.
Okay.
Maybe getting close to 50.
No,
Okay.
What?
46, I think.
46.
Was it?
I think it's 46.
Trump, well, maybe it's 45. Bush was 42,
Which Bush?
the younger, I think. He's 42, and then Obama was 43, and Trump was 44, and Biden's 45, I
okay.
think.
Okay. All
Of
right.
course, the thing about that is our presidents, except for one, served no more than 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
except for FDR.
Mm-hmm.
And we now haven't, no one of them will. So unlike some of these people who ruled for like
Years.
decades,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
we get, and like the kings and queens of England, like Victoria was queen for so many years, and Elizabeth II was like queen for 70 some odd years.
70 years,
Okay.
maybe a little longer. I just remember the last couple of years, there was the 70th Jubilee
Yes.
of her.
All right. Well, why is this genealogy of Jesus important to Matthew?
Matthew was trying to, I'm giving you what they told me when I was taking Bible.
Okay.
So it's Methodist. So, no, actually, the guy who taught it was a Presbyterian minister, so I guess. But Matthew was very concerned about keeping the heritage of Jesus within Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his big things was showing that Jesus was not trying to lead people away from Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to carry on Judaism
Mm-hmm.
and to some extent reform it,
Mm-hmm.
as some of the other prophets had done, as Ezekiel and Elijah and several others had come down and said, listen, you know, some of this stuff you're doing needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, and Matthew felt that Jesus was doing the same thing
Mm-hmm.
about that, and so he was very concerned with the Jewish ancestry of Jesus. One thing about lucky numbers, the Jews did not have at that time separate symbols for numbers.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers were made of letters with a little mark beside them. You hear of jots and tittles. These are little marks you put around letters to show the different sounds. Or if you put a certain little mark in front of a letter, it meant this is a number.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it was a 2-digit number and it had something like the start of a word like good or fun or nice or something, then that was considered a lucky number. But if it was the first two letters of a word like evil or cruel, you would say this is a bad luck number, and that's where they got their numerology,
Okay.
from the letters that the numbers were made out
All
of.
right. All right. And my little speculation is that Matthew wanted to show that through Abraham and David, the connection of the long-awaited Christ. In other words, what was in the prophecy in the scriptures is true, isn't it? Okay, and then our author said it also shows the human side of Jesus too, isn't it? He was fully human, and so it was shown through the virgin birth, and then as he grew up and was among everyone. How long do you think 42 generations was? I was trying to figure this up. I said, would you use 50 years, or maybe 40 years, or?
Well, gosh, Abraham lived to be 90 himself, didn't
Right.
You know, there were 100 and
Yeah.
back there was
So-
nothing.
Methuselah was 969.
Okay. All right.
So you just
Yeah.
never can tell.
Okay. Well, anyway, my little just speculation. Well, 42 generations at 50 years each is 2,100 years, and 42 generations at 40 years is 1,680 years or something. But anyway, this is going way, way back in time, isn't it? All right. We talked about some of the interesting things that did pop up with some of those people right there. Our author shares some other thoughts with us, and think about God's faithfulness and inclusion of all people. And I think that's one idea that was shown in our list of people here. Well, maybe we need to be more inclusive of other people too. And I thought it was interesting that our author brought up, consider political parties. Do we consider the members of a party to be exact duplicates of each other, saying and thinking the same thing? But anyway, the author says, well, what if we could be curious and share life's experiences with each other, such as like our growing up, our joys, our heartaches, difficult decisions, or other difficulties that we have? And would this open up opportunities for empathy and understanding? But maybe we're red dots, or we might be blue dots, but we still share many things together, don't we? And sometimes it's better not to talk too much politics at lunch. Okay. Another thought is that we are all members of the family of faith, and we share many connections, and we might not all gather to worship at the same time and the same place, the same way, but we are still all of God's people who carry out the work of the church. And I was thinking about, our little church, we still function, I think, very good to be as small as we are, aren't we?
Yeah.
And then other churches are able to do the same thing. They might do it a little differently, but they still do the same thing. Let me share this with you. Our author wrote this, and names are powerful. Matthew uses them to invoke critical moments in the history of our tradition so that we too can recognize the perseverance, hope, boldness, and dynamism where God reveals presence together with communities of faith. When we recognize these things, we open ourselves to receive God's faithfulness and inclusion of others and ourselves together with all. Having received the grace of God's faithfulness and inclusion, we cannot help but live by working alongside others in love so that each of us would live in this perseverance, hope, boldness, and dynamism of a life in Christ. And our book has kind of an interesting question on page 18, right in the middle. Consider how faith and cleverness functions together in the lives of the women ancestors of Jesus, in the few that we mentioned. Do you think it was a combination of that? In some cases, maybe?
Well, many of the women in this lineage certainly were clever enough to use manipulation to get what they wanted, and subsequently it produced heirs in the genealogy,
That's exactly right.
and it produced the heirs they wanted.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting to note that some of the people that were not considered at that time and would not be considered today to be a shining examples, because he says Rahab was a sex worker.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the word for that is prostitute.
Yeah.
You know, and the people felt differently about prostitution then. But so if you start saying, "Well, I'm so high and mighty," well, you look back, and sometimes looking back there, some of the kings and queens of England were not all the things they should be. Think of Henry VIII.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we all have some very interesting backgrounds.
Think of George II, who had George IV, who had the door slammed in his wife's face when she was entering the Westminster Abbey to participate in his coronation because he hated her so much.
Good gracious.
My goodness.
Okay.
That would be bad.
Does anyone have any other thoughts about our lesson today?
No, I just think it was a very interesting lesson, and it does indicate that it's important to remember that Jesus was a man, a human being, just like us. And it makes a difference, you know. Allah was not a human being. Muhammad was, but he wasn't a god.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're the only major religion I know of that actually had a god who was also a man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had many of the Hindu religions have gods who come and appear as human beings. They're called avatars. And the Hindu religion has a lot of avatars. But those people are not human beings. They have the appearance of a human being, but they're actually a god. So it makes a difference, I think. It explains one of the reasons why Christianity, I think, appealed to so many people back in the ancient days. They felt like they could relate to real people.
Thought about that. If you would, let's turn to page 14 and we'll read our closing prayer together.
God in our midst, as we approach your word, expand our view of the families of faith, and lead us into faithful responses together with people beyond our immediate community, so that we might also fully participate with and find acceptance within our faith community. Amen.